What if the woman everyone called a kidnapper was actually the only reason an entire town survived? In the unforgiving Wild West, an Apache woman risked everything to save a helpless orphan boy. But instead of gratitude, she was arrested and condemned by the very people she protected. As a deadly outlaw gang closed in, the town would soon discover a painful truth. They had imprisoned their greatest hero. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your friends, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Sheriff Mason? Now saddle up and let's get started. The Arizona Territory in the summer of 1886 was a place where mercy was rarer than rain. Endless desert stretched beyond the horizon, broken only by towering red cliffs, lonely cacti, and narrow wagon trails that disappeared into the wilderness. Every traveler knew the frontier held equal measures of opportunity and death. Honest ranchers carried rifles beside their saddles, while stagecoach drivers prayed they would reach the next town before sunset. Outlaw gangs ruled the empty spaces between settlements, striking without warning and leaving only silence behind. In this harsh land, children who lost their families rarely survived for long, and the desert showed compassion to no one. 10-year-old Eli had once believed the journey west would bring his family a better future. His father had accepted work at a silver mine near Dry Creek, and together they joined a small wagon caravan crossing Arizona. For days, everything went peacefully until smoke suddenly appeared on the horizon. Moments later, masked riders thundered across the valley. Bullets shattered the quiet morning as the Black Rattlers Gang surrounded the wagons. Horses screamed, frightened families scattered, and desperate gunfire echoed between the cliffs. Eli's father pushed him behind a large boulder and whispered, "Run, no matter what happens." It was the last time Eli ever saw his parents alive. Terrified and alone, Eli ran until his legs could carry him no farther. He wandered through the desert for 2 endless days without food or clean water. His small canteen became empty before the first sunset, while the burning Arizona sun drained every ounce of strength from his body. Sharp rocks tore holes through his worn boots, leaving painful blisters across his feet. Every distant shimmer looked like water, yet disappeared as he approached. Hunger twisted his stomach and fear settled deep inside his heart. When darkness came, the cries of coyotes echoed through the canyons, reminding him how helpless he truly was. By the 3rd afternoon, Eli's strength was gone. He stumbled beneath the weak shade of a dying mesquite tree and collapsed into the hot sand. His breathing became slow and shallow as the desert heat surrounded him like fire. High above, vultures circled patiently, sensing another life slipping away. Miles away, an Apache woman named Naya rode silently across the desert on her trusted paint horse. Dressed in an authentic buckskin dress decorated with colorful beadwork and turquoise jewelry, she noticed the unusual flight of the birds. Years of living on the frontier had taught her that vultures often revealed tragedies long before people discovered them. Following her instincts, Naya guided her horse toward the circling birds. When she reached the lonely mesquite tree, she found the unconscious boy barely clinging to life. His lips were cracked from thirst, his face burned by the relentless sun, and dust covered every inch of his clothing. Without hesitation, she poured the last of her water into his mouth and gently lifted him onto her horse. Instead of taking him toward town, she traveled through hidden canyon paths known only to Apache families. Deep inside the rocky wilderness rested a secret spring where cool water flowed beneath ancient cottonwood trees, protected from both outlaws and strangers. Naya carefully cleaned Eli's wounds using fresh water gathered from the spring. She crushed healing desert herbs into a soothing paste and wrapped his injured feet with soft buckskin cloth. Throughout the night she remained beside him, feeding the fire and watching over him while the desert grew silent beneath the stars. Before sunrise, Eli slowly opened his eyes. At first, fear flashed across his face as he saw someone unfamiliar kneeling beside him. But Naya smiled warmly and offered him fresh water. Her calm voice carried kindness instead of suspicion, and for the first time since losing his parents, Eli felt completely safe. During the following days, Eli slowly regained his strength. Naya prepared simple meals of roasted rabbit, corn cakes, and fresh berries gathered from hidden valleys. She never forced him to speak about the attack, understanding that grief healed slowly. Instead, she showed him how to recognize animal tracks, collect clean drinking water, and respect the desert rather than fear it. Little by little, Eli began smiling again. He laughed while helping gather firewood, and eagerly listened as Naya shared old Apache stories about courage, honor, and protecting the innocent. The lonely canyon gradually became the closest thing he had left to a home. Several miles away, the town of Dry Creek buzzed with rumors about the missing child. Ranchers searching for survivors discovered fresh horse tracks leading toward Apache territory. Without investigating further, they assumed the worst. Old prejudice blinded their judgment. Around the saloon, frightened settlers whispered that an Apache woman must have kidnapped the orphan after attacking the wagon train. None of them knew the real killers were still roaming the frontier. Fear transformed into anger as the story spread from house to house. Before long, nearly everyone demanded immediate action against the mysterious Apache woman they had never even met. Dozens of ranchers crowded outside his office, insisting that the boy must be rescued before it was too late. Though Mason lacked real evidence, he reluctantly organized a search party. Armed riders followed the horse tracks toward the northern canyons, convinced they were riding into enemy territory. None of them imagined they were actually approaching the very woman who had saved Eli's life. While the posse prepared for confrontation, Naya remained unaware that suspicion, not gratitude, was racing toward her peaceful camp. Late that afternoon, Eli spotted dust rising beyond the canyon entrance. Within minutes, Sheriff Mason and nearly 20 armed riders surrounded the hidden spring. Ranchers raised their rifles as they saw Eli standing beside Naya. Before either of them could explain, angry voices filled the canyon. Several men accused Naya of kidnapping the child, while others demanded she surrender immediately. Eli desperately shouted that she had saved his life, but panic drowned out every word he spoke. Sheriff Mason reluctantly stepped forward and placed Naya under arrest, believing he was protecting the boy even as he unknowingly punished the person who had rescued him. As the posse escorted Naya toward Dry Creek beneath the fading evening sun, Eli looked back at the quiet canyon that had become his refuge. Tears filled his eyes as he realized the woman who had treated him like family was being judged not for her actions, but for who she was. Hidden among distant cliffs, unknown to everyone below, several members of the Black Rattlers Gang watched the entire scene unfold through rifle scopes. Their leader smiled coldly. With the Apache woman taken away and the town distracted by fear, nothing now stood between his gang and the greatest robbery Dry Creek had ever seen. Sheriff Mason led the long procession back to Dry Creek just as darkness settled over the frontier. Lanterns flickered along the wooden streets while curious townspeople gathered outside their homes to witness the Apache woman's arrival. Some cheered, believing justice had finally been served. Others stared at Naya with cold suspicion, whispering stories they had invented before hearing a single fact. Eli struggled against the deputy holding his shoulder, shouting that Naya had rescued him from the desert and never harmed him. His desperate voice disappeared beneath the angry crowd. To them, fear sounded far more convincing than the truth spoken by a frightened 10-year-old boy. Inside the small jailhouse, Sheriff Mason unlocked a single iron-barred cell and motioned for Naya to step inside. She obeyed without resistance, her calm expression confusing everyone who expected anger or hatred. Mason hesitated before locking the heavy door. Something about the boy's unwavering loyalty troubled him. Eli refused to leave the jail, sitting on the wooden bench outside the cell long after midnight. Through the bars, Naya quietly reminded him to stay brave and never let bitterness replace kindness. Even after being falsely accused, her greatest concern remained the frightened child whose life she had promised to protect. Far beyond the town limits, the real killers prepared to strike again. Hidden inside a narrow canyon, Black Rattlers leader Silas Kane gathered nearly 30 armed outlaws around a blazing campfire. A scout reported that Dry Creek had become consumed by the arrest of an Apache woman, leaving most of the town focused on celebration instead of security. Kane smiled as he spread a rough map across a wooden crate. The bank had just received payroll money from the nearby silver mine, and ranchers had gathered for the weekly cattle auction. By dawn, more cash would be inside Dry Creek than at any other time of the year. To Kane, the town had become the perfect target. While the outlaws finalized their plans, Sheriff Mason sat alone inside his office studying the evidence once again. Something refused to make sense. Eli had described masked riders wearing black bandanas, yet Naya carried no stolen property, no weapons taken from the caravan, and no sign of violence. Instead, deputies had found only herbal medicine, fresh water, and supplies used to care for the wounded boy. Mason remembered the fear in Eli's eyes whenever he spoke about the attack and the gratitude that filled his voice whenever he looked toward Naya. Doubt slowly replaced certainty, and for the first time the sheriff wondered if the town had arrested the wrong person. Despite Eli's desperate pleas, the people of Dry Creek refused to believe him. The frightened boy stood in the middle of the street, tears running down his dusty face as he shouted that Naya had rescued him from the desert and saved his life. His words disappeared beneath the angry voices of the crowd gathered outside the jail. Ranchers demanded swift justice, convinced the Apache woman had kidnapped the child for her own mysterious purpose. Sheriff Mason reluctantly locked the heavy iron cell, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Naya remained calm behind the bars, saying nothing in her defense while Eli sat nearby, refusing to leave her side. As darkness settled across the frontier, the celebration outside the jail continued. Believing the town was finally safe, merchants closed their stores with relief, and families returned home without posting extra guards. Hidden beyond the northern hills, however, the Black Rattlers Gang watched every movement through spyglasses. Their ruthless leader Silas Kane smiled as he realized the town's attention had shifted away from real danger. He ordered 30 armed riders to prepare for the attack before dawn. With the sheriff distracted and the citizens divided by fear, Dry Creek had become the easiest target they had ever encountered. Kane intended to finish what he had started by robbing the bank, burning the trading post, and leaving no witnesses alive. Inside the quiet jailhouse, Sheriff Mason spread maps across his wooden desk while replaying Eli's story in his mind. The frightened boy had never changed a single detail about the attack, and every description matched reports from neighboring settlements robbed by the Black Rattlers. Mason quietly examined the supplies deputies had taken from Naya. There were no stolen valuables, only healing herbs, clean bandages, dried meat, and simple tools used for survival. None of it belonged to a criminal. As midnight approached, the sheriff began questioning whether prejudice had clouded the judgment of everyone in Dry Creek, including his own. Unable to sleep, Eli slipped from the wooden bench outside Naya's cell and quietly spoke to her through the iron bars. He thanked her for saving his life and apologized because the town refused to believe him. Naya gently smiled and placed her hand against the bars. She told him that courage was not measured by winning every battle, but by refusing to abandon the truth, even when nobody listened. Then her expression suddenly changed. She noticed a faint orange glow reflecting against the jailhouse window from the northern hills. Experienced Apache scouts recognized such signals immediately. It was not a campfire. It was a coordinated smoke marker used by outlaw gangs preparing to attack before sunrise. Naya immediately called Sheriff Mason to the cell window and pointed toward the distant hills. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then another signal appeared, followed by a third, flashing briefly through the darkness. Mason's face turned pale as he remembered similar reports from other frontier towns attacked by the Black Rattlers. Eli quickly confirmed that the outlaws had used the same signals before murdering his parents. Realizing the terrible mistake he had made, Mason unlocked the cell without hesitation. Looking directly into Naya's eyes, he admitted, "I judged you before I knew the truth." Naya nodded silently. There was no time for anger when innocent lives were about to be lost. Church bells suddenly rang across Dry Creek as riders burst from the northern hills. Gunshots shattered the peaceful morning, sending frightened families running for cover. Silas Kane and his gang stormed into the main street, firing into the air and setting wagons ablaze to spread panic. Smoke filled the sky as terrified horses broke free from their hitching posts. Sheriff Mason gathered his deputies, but they were badly outnumbered. Naya quickly took command, guiding the sheriff and several volunteers through a hidden canyon trail that curved behind the outlaws. It was an old Apache route unknown to anyone else, allowing the defenders to surround the gang without being seen. The battle raged across the dusty streets of Dry Creek. Naya moved with incredible speed, using the rooftops, alleyways, and narrow trails to outmaneuver the outlaws. Her arrows disarmed gunmen before they could reach innocent families, while Sheriff Mason and his deputies pushed the attackers back toward the town square. Eli bravely helped lead frightened children and elderly townspeople into the safety of the church basement. When Silas Kane tried to escape with bags of stolen silver, Naya intercepted him near the old bridge. After a fierce struggle, Mason arrived with 2 deputies, and together they forced Kane to surrender. One by one, the remaining gang members threw down their weapons as the town finally reclaimed its freedom. As the smoke cleared and the sun rose above the Arizona mountains, silence settled over Dry Creek. The same townspeople who had demanded Naya's arrest now stood before her with lowered heads, ashamed of how they had judged the woman who had risked everything to save them. Sheriff Mason publicly apologized and thanked her for protecting the town when no one else could. Eli ran forward and embraced Naya, refusing to let go. The crowd erupted into grateful applause as church bells rang once more, this time in celebration instead of fear. Naya accepted no reward and asked for nothing in return. She simply smiled at Eli, mounted her faithful paint horse, and rode toward the distant red canyons. Long after she disappeared beyond the horizon, people across the American frontier told the story of the Apache woman who saved an orphan boy, protected an entire town, and proved that compassion, courage, and truth are always stronger than fear and prejudice.